The First World War, which ended in 1918, left a scar across the face of Europe. The continent was tired from years of brutal fighting. Great empires that had stood for centuries, such as the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian and German empires, had collapsed. In their place, new countries were formed, often with uncertain borders and mixed populations, leading to new tensions. Many people hoped that the war to end all wars would truly bring lasting peace. However, beneath the surface, old hatreds and new problems were beginning to grow. The economic cost of the war was immense, and nations struggled to rebuild their shattered industries and societies. This period was one of great change and considerable unease for millions. The 1920s, often called the Roaring Twenties, brought a brief period of apparent prosperity and cultural excitement to some parts of the world, particularly the United States and Western Europe. New forms of music like jazz became popular, and new technologies such as radio and cinema began to change daily life. However, this economic boom was not universal. Many farmers and industrial workers did not share in the new wealth, and economic inequality remained a significant issue. The foundations of this prosperity were also quite fragile, often built on credit and speculation rather than solid growth. This era of optimism masked underlying economic weaknesses that would soon have devastating consequences for the global community. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, officially ending World War I. The main powers involved in its creation were the Allied victors Britain, France, Italy, and the United States. Germany, defeated and not invited to the negotiations, was forced to accept its harsh terms. The treaty aimed to prevent Germany from ever starting another war. It redrew the map of Europe, took away German colonies, and severely limited the size of Germany's army and navy. The architects of the treaty, particularly France, were driven by a desire for security and to make Germany pay for the immense destruction caused by the war. One of the most controversial parts of the treaty was the War Guilt Clause. This clause, Article 231, forced Germany to accept full responsibility for causing the war. This was deeply humiliating for many Germans. Based on this clause, Germany was also required to pay enormous sums of money in reparations to the Allied countries. These payments were intended to cover the costs of the war damage. However, the amount was so large that it crippled the German economy for years. This economic burden created widespread poverty and resentment among the German population, who felt they were being unjustly punished for a war they believed others also had a hand in starting. The treaty also led to significant territorial losses for Germany. Alsace-Lorraine was returned to France. Parts of Germany were given to Belgium, Denmark, Poland and Czechoslovakia. The Rhineland, an important industrial area in Western Germany, was demilitarized. German territory was split by the Polish corridor, which gave Poland access to the sea but separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. These territorial changes not only weakened Germany economically and militarily, but also fueled a strong sense of national injustice. Many Germans living in the lost territories now found themselves as minorities in new countries, further stoking nationalist sentiments. The impact of the Treaty of Versailles was profound and far-reaching. While intended to secure peace, many historians argue it created the conditions for future conflict. The harsh terms fostered deep anger and a desire for revenge within Germany. This resentment was skillfully exploited by extremist political groups, most notably the Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler. They promised to tear up the treaty, restore Germany's honor, and reclaim lost territories. The treaty's failure to create a stable and lasting peace demonstrated the difficulty of resolving complex international disputes through punitive measures alone, ultimately contributing to the outbreak of World War II just 2 decades later. Adolf Hitler was an Austrian-born politician who became the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, known as the Nazi Party. After serving in the German army during World War I, he was deeply angered by Germany's defeat and the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. He joined the small German Workers' Party in 1919, which he soon transformed into the Nazi Party. Hitler was a powerful and charismatic speaker. He exploited the economic hardship and national humiliation felt by many Germans during the 1920s and early 1930s. His message resonated with a population desperate for change and strong leadership. The Nazi Party's ideology was based on extreme nationalism, racism, and anti-communism. Hitler promoted the idea of a master race of Aryan Germans who were superior to other peoples, particularly Jews, whom he blamed for Germany's problems. His book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, outlined his political goals, including the abolition of the Treaty of Versailles, the unification of all German-speaking peoples into a greater Germany, and the conquest of Lebensraum, living space, in Eastern Europe. The Nazis used propaganda very effectively, organizing mass rallies and controlling newspapers to spread their message and demonize their opponents. They promised to restore German pride and economic stability. The Great Depression played a crucial role in Hitler's rise to power. As unemployment soared and poverty spread, more and more Germans turned to extremist parties like the Nazis and the Communists. The democratic Weimar Republic government seemed weak and unable to solve the crisis. In the 1932 elections, the Nazi Party became the largest party in the German parliament, the Reichstag. On January 30th, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. Although initially part of a coalition government, Hitler quickly moved to consolidate his power through a series of calculated and often brutal maneuvers. Once in power, Hitler systematically dismantled German democracy. The Reichstag fire in February 1933, which the Nazis blamed on communists, was used as a pretext to suspend civil liberties. The Enabling Act, passed in March 1933, gave Hitler dictatorial powers, allowing him to make laws without the Reichstag's approval. Other political parties were banned and trade unions were dissolved. Opponents of the regime were arrested, imprisoned in concentration camps, or killed. Hitler declared himself Führer, leader of Germany, in 1934 after Hindenburg's death, establishing a totalitarian state where the Nazi Party controlled every aspect of German life, from the economy to education and culture. By the late 1930s, Adolf Hitler had rebuilt Germany's military in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. He had also reoccupied the Rhineland and annexed Austria in 1938, claiming to unite German-speaking peoples. Later that year, at the Munich conference, Britain and France agreed to Germany's demand to annex the Sudetenland, a German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia, in an attempt to avoid war, a policy known as appeasement. However, this only emboldened Hitler. In March 1939, he broke his promises and occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. His next target was Poland. Hitler demanded the return of Danzig, a largely German city, and access across the Polish corridor. Poland, with guarantees of support from Britain and France, refused Hitler's demands. To secure his eastern front before attacking Poland, Hitler stunned the world by signing a non-aggression pact with his ideological enemy, Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union, in August 1939. This Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact included secret clauses to divide Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe between Germany and the USSR. With the Soviet Union neutralized, Hitler felt confident to proceed with his plans. He believed that Britain and France would not go to war over Poland, just as they had not intervened decisively over Czechoslovakia. He gravely miscalculated their resolve this time. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland from the west, north and south. The German military used a new tactic called blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This involved swift, coordinated attacks by tanks, panzers, motorized infantry and aircraft, the Luftwaffe. The Polish army, though brave, was outnumbered and outmatched by Germany's modern war machine. Polish forces fought hard, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the speed and ferocity of the German assault. The Luftwaffe bombed Polish cities, airfields and communication lines, causing widespread destruction and chaos, and disrupting Polish efforts to mobilize and coordinate their defenses. 2 days later, on September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France, honoring their commitment to Poland, declared war on Germany. This marked the official beginning of World War II in Europe. Despite their declarations, Britain and France were unable to provide direct military assistance to Poland in time. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, as secretly agreed with Germany. Caught between two powerful invaders, Polish resistance crumbled. Warsaw, the capital, surrendered on September 27th after a heavy siege. By early October, Poland was completely occupied and divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. The swift and brutal conquest of Poland demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of the German war machine. Section 5. Global conflict, key battles and turning points. After the fall of Poland, there was a period of relative quiet on the Western Front known as the Phony War. This ended dramatically in the spring of 1940. Germany launched a blitzkrieg against Denmark and Norway, securing vital iron ore supplies. Then, in May 1940, German forces invaded France, Belgium, Luxembourg and the Netherlands. Using tactics similar to those in Poland, German panzers bypassed the heavily fortified Maginot Line by attacking through the Ardennes forest. Allied forces were caught off guard and quickly overwhelmed. British and French troops were pushed back to the French port of Dunkirk, where a heroic evacuation by sea saved over 300,000 soldiers, though much equipment was lost. France surrendered in June 1940. With France defeated, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. The Battle of Britain, fought in the skies over southern England from July to October 1940, was a crucial turning point. Hitler planned to invade Britain, known as Operation Sea Lion, but first needed air superiority. The German Luftwaffe launched massive bombing raids against British airfields, radar stations and later cities, including London, during the Blitz. The Royal Air Force, though outnumbered, fought bravely and skillfully, inflicting heavy losses on the Luftwaffe. Ultimately, Germany failed to gain air superiority, and Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. This was Germany's first major defeat. In June 1941, Hitler made a fateful decision. He launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This opened up a vast eastern front. Initially, the German advance was rapid, deep into Soviet territory. However, the harsh Russian winter, long supply lines and stiffening Soviet resistance eventually halted the German armies near Moscow. The Battle of Stalingrad, from August 1942 to February 1943, was another major turning point. After months of brutal street fighting, the German Sixth Army was encircled and forced to surrender. This was a catastrophic defeat for Germany, marking the beginning of the Red Army's long push back towards Berlin. In the Pacific, Japan, allied with Germany and Italy, attacked the US naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on December 7, 1941. This surprise attack brought the United States officially into the war. Initially, Japan achieved a string of victories, conquering vast territories in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. However, the Battle of Midway in June 1942 proved to be a decisive turning point in the Pacific War. The US Navy inflicted a devastating defeat on the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. This victory crippled Japan's naval air power and allowed the US to begin its island-hopping campaign, gradually retaking territory from Japan. Section 6. The Great Alliances, Axis, and Allied Powers. The Second World War was fought between two major military alliances, the Axis powers and the Allied powers. The Axis powers were primarily Germany, Italy, and Japan. These nations were united by their expansionist ambitions and their opposition to the post-World War I international order. Germany, under Adolf Hitler, sought to dominate Europe and create a vast empire. Italy, led by Benito Mussolini, aimed to establish a new Roman Empire in the Mediterranean and Africa. Japan, under its militaristic government, sought to create a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere by conquering China and other parts of Asia and the Pacific. The Tripartite Pact, signed in September 1940, formally allied these three nations. The Allied powers, often referred to as the Big Three, were initially Great Britain and France. After France fell in 1940, Britain continued the fight, later joined by the Soviet Union in June 1941, after Germany invaded it, and the United States in December 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor. China had also been fighting Japan since 1937 and was a major Allied power. Many other countries around the world eventually joined the Allies, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand and India, then part of the British Empire, as well as governments in exile from occupied European nations like Poland and Free France. Their common goal was to defeat the Axis aggression and restore international peace and security. The involvement of these major powers transformed the conflict into a truly global war, fought across multiple continents and oceans. Germany's military might initially overwhelmed much of Europe. Italy's campaigns in North Africa and the Balkans, though less successful, expanded the conflict zones. Japan's swift conquests in Asia and the Pacific brought war to millions more. The industrial capacity of the United States, once it entered the war, became a decisive factor, earning it the nickname the Arsenal of Democracy. The Soviet Union's vast manpower and resilience on the Eastern Front absorbed the bulk of Germany's military strength, leading to enormous casualties on both sides. Cooperation among the Allied powers was essential, but often complicated by differing political ideologies and strategic priorities. Leaders like Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin met at several wartime conferences such as Tehran, Yalta and Potsdam to coordinate their military efforts and discuss the post-war world. Despite tensions, particularly between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union, they managed to maintain a united front against the Axis. The sheer scale of resources, manpower and industrial production mobilized by the Allies eventually proved too much for the Axis powers to overcome, leading to their ultimate defeat. Section 7. The European theatre concludes Germany's defeat. By 1944, the tide had decisively turned against Germany in Europe. On the Eastern Front, Soviet forces were relentlessly pushing the German army back towards its own borders, liberating vast territories. In the West, the Allies prepared for a massive invasion of German-occupied France. This invasion, known as D-Day, took place on June 6, 1944. Allied troops from the United States, Britain, Canada and other nations landed on the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious assault in history. Despite fierce German resistance and heavy casualties, the Allies established a beachhead and began to push inland, opening a crucial second front against Germany. Following the D-Day landings, Allied forces advanced across France, liberating Paris in August 1944. Simultaneously, other Allied forces advanced north through Italy after landing there in 1943. Germany attempted a final major offensive in the west, known as the Battle of the Bulge, in December 1944. Although it caused significant Allied casualties and a temporary setback, the German offensive ultimately failed, further depleting Germany's already strained resources and experienced troops. By early 1945, Allied armies were crossing the Rhine River and advancing into the heart of Germany from the west, while Soviet forces were closing in on Berlin from the east. The final months of the war in Europe were marked by intense fighting and widespread destruction. Allied bombing raids devastated German cities, crippling industrial production and civilian morale. As Soviet troops approached Berlin, Adolf Hitler, holed up in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, refused to surrender. He saw his empire crumbling around him. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet soldiers just streets away, Hitler committed suicide. The battle for Berlin was one of the last and bloodiest of the war in Europe, resulting in hundreds of thousands of casualties as German forces, including young boys and old men, made a desperate last stand. With Hitler dead and Berlin fallen, German resistance quickly collapsed. On May 7, 1945, German military leaders signed an unconditional surrender to the Western Allies at Reims, France. A second surrender ceremony insisted upon by the Soviets took place in Berlin on May 8th. This day became known as VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, marking the official end of World War II in Europe. The continent lay in ruins, with millions dead and many more displaced. The task of rebuilding and establishing a new order would be immense, but the immediate threat of Nazi Germany had finally been extinguished after nearly 6 years of brutal conflict. Section 8. The Pacific War's End, the Atomic Dawn. While the war in Europe concluded in May 1945, the fight against Japan in the Pacific continued fiercely. The United States and its allies had been engaged in a costly island-hopping campaign, gradually pushing Japanese forces back towards their home islands. Battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa in early 1945 were exceptionally bloody, demonstrating the Japanese military's determination to fight to the death and the high casualties that an invasion of Japan itself would likely entail. Japanese soldiers often preferred suicide charges or fighting to the last man over surrender. and kamikaze pilots inflicted heavy losses on Allied naval vessels. Faced with the prospect of a prolonged and devastating invasion of the Japanese mainland, which military planners estimated could cost hundreds of thousands of Allied lives, the new US President Harry S. Truman, who took office after Roosevelt's death in April 1945, made a momentous decision. He authorized the use of a new secret weapon, the atomic bomb. This weapon had been developed in utmost secrecy by the Manhattan Project, a massive scientific and industrial undertaking. Truman hoped that the bomb's unprecedented destructive power would force Japan to surrender quickly, thereby saving lives on both sides in the long run. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion was catastrophic, instantly killing an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people and leveling a large part of the city. Many more would die later from radiation sickness and injuries. Despite this horrific devastation, the Japanese government did not immediately surrender. 3 days later, on August 9th, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki. On the same day, the Soviet Union, honoring its earlier pledge to the Allies, declared war on Japan and invaded Japanese-occupied Manchuria. The combined shock of the atomic bombings and the Soviet entry into the war finally compelled the Japanese leadership to accept defeat. On August 15th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender to the Allies in a radio address to the Japanese people. This day became known as VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day. The formal surrender documents were signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, officially ending World War II. The use of atomic bombs remains one of the most controversial decisions in history, ushering in the nuclear age and forever changing the nature of warfare and international relations. Section 9, A New Era Post-War World and Lasting Legacies. The end of World War II in 1945 brought about profound geopolitical changes and reshaped the global landscape. The old European colonial empires, weakened by the war, began to crumble as independence movements gained strength in Asia and Africa. Two new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerged with vastly different political and economic ideologies: democracy and capitalism versus communism. Their rivalry, which had been suppressed during their wartime alliance against the Axis, quickly developed into a new global conflict known as the Cold War. This period of intense ideological struggle, military competition and proxy wars would dominate international affairs for the next 4 decades. The human cost of World War II was staggering. Estimates suggest that between 70 to 85 million people perished, including civilians and military personnel. The Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators, stood as a horrific testament to the depths of human cruelty. Cities across Europe and Asia lay in ruins, economies were shattered, and millions of people were displaced, becoming refugees. The world was faced with the enormous task of rebuilding, seeking justice for war crimes through trials like those at Nuremberg and Tokyo, and trying to create mechanisms to prevent such a devastating conflict from ever happening again. In an effort to maintain international peace and security, the United Nations, or UN, was established in October 1945, succeeding the ineffective League of Nations. Its charter aimed to foster cooperation among nations, promote human rights, and provide a forum for resolving international disputes peacefully. Germany and Japan were occupied and underwent processes of demilitarization and democratization. Germany was divided into West Germany, aligned with the Western Allies, and East Germany, a Soviet satellite state, a division that became a central symbol of the Cold War. Japan, under US occupation, adopted a new pacifist constitution and rebuilt itself into a major economic power. The legacy of World War II continues to influence the world today. It led to significant advancements in technology, including jet aircraft, radar, and nuclear energy. The war also highlighted the dangers of unchecked nationalism, totalitarianism, and racial hatred. It underscored the importance of international cooperation, human rights, and the rule of law. The memory of the war serves as a solemn reminder of the immense sacrifices made and the catastrophic consequences of global conflict. The lessons learned from this devastating period continue to shape political thought, international relations, and the ongoing pursuit of a more peaceful and stable world order for all nations.